September 17th breaks cold over Maryland. 30,000 Union soldiers mass before Confederate lines. Thomas Jackson sits motionless on his horse, watching. His pale eyes betray nothing. Around him, 14,000 exhausted Southerners prepare for slaughter. Jackson whispers a prayer. History is about to judge whether faith conquers overwhelming odds today. Jackson wasn't always called Stonewall. His soldiers nicknamed him for his unshakable resolve during earlier battles. Before war, he taught mathematics at Virginia Military Institute, beloved by cadets for his peculiar brilliance. Now that brilliance must keep his men alive against impossible numbers. He checks his rifle methodically, a ritual performed before every engagement, without exception. Dunker Church sits isolated on elevated terrain, its white walls gleaming against gray skies. Behind it, a natural fortress. A sunken road carved deep by centuries of wagon traffic. Jackson positions his men carefully here, creating interlocking fields of fire. Every rock becomes a stronghold. Every tree hides a marksman. The landscape itself becomes weaponry. Union artillery erupts with apocalyptic fury. Shells scream overhead, detonating behind Confederate lines. Dust clouds obscure everything. Jackson doesn't move. His adjutant asks nervously, "General, should we withdraw?" Jackson replies simply, "No." That single word ripples through surrounding officers. If Jackson remains, they remain. If he's calm, perhaps survival remains possible after all. Union General Hooker commits his first corps. Thousands of blue-clad soldiers advance through golden cornfields, their formations tight and disciplined. They expect rapid Confederate collapse. Jackson's riflemen wait patiently at 100 yards. Then, everything changes. Musket fire erupts like thunder from organized hell. Entire Federal ranks simply vanish. Survivors stumble backward through smoke and blood. Lieutenant William Carver, barely 22, stands beside Jackson throughout the opening assault. He's Jackson's courier, responsible for carrying orders across the chaotic battlefield. A Federal sharpshooter's bullet finds him mid-stride. Carver collapses, blood pouring from his chest. Jackson kneels briefly, closes Carver's eyes, whispers something inaudible. Then he rises and continues directing battle as though nothing happened. General John Bell Hood appears through smoke clouds, leading his division toward the collapsing left flank. Hood sees thousands of Federal bodies carpeting the cornfield. He's never witnessed such carnage, yet more Union soldiers keep advancing. Hood tells Jackson, "Sir, they're endless." Jackson replies, "Then we'll end them endlessly." Hood nods, understanding that Jackson possesses something beyond courage, absolute certainty. Federal reinforcements reorganize and attack again, this time targeting the sunken road directly. They understand now that frontal assaults fail. Perhaps flanking movements work better. Confederate defenders wait behind the raised earthen bank, invisible to attacking soldiers. When Union forces reach the road, Confederate muskets unleash devastation at point-blank range. Bodies accumulate like cordwood. The road becomes a killing ground. Hood's division charges forward with bayonets fixed, screaming the rebel yell, that peculiar high-pitched shriek that terrifies Federal soldiers. For 30 minutes, hand-to-hand combat rages around Dunker Church. Men punch, stab, shoot, wrestle. Hood's soldiers are Southern frontiersmen, brutal fighters schooled in violence. They break through Federal lines temporarily, but Union reserves push them back. Hood loses 2,000 men preserving Jackson's line. With reserves nearly exhausted, Jackson commits his final regiment to flank Hooker's exposed right wing. The maneuver risks disaster if it fails. Confederate lines collapse completely. But Jackson calculates odds precisely. The attack works. Union soldiers, confused by Confederate fire from unexpected angles, hesitate. That hesitation, lasting perhaps 5 minutes, gives Jackson the breathing room he desperately needed. Confederate Private James Morrison crouches behind a fallen oak, ramming cartridges into his musket repeatedly. His shoulder throbs from recoil. Powder burns his face. Around him, friends lie motionless, some dead, some merely unconscious from shock. Morrison wonders who he's killing. Farmers, mechanics, factory workers. He doesn't have time for philosophy. Only survival matters. He loads again. Fighting diminishes around noon. Both armies collapse into exhaustion. Jackson uses this interval ruthlessly. He reorganizes scattered units, fills gaps with reserves, establishes new defensive positions. He moves among soldiers, speaking quietly to officers. His voice never rises, never cracks. Soldiers who see him straighten their spines. Jackson's calm presence transmits confidence through invisible channels. An elderly private approaches Jackson nervously, asking directly, "General, why we dying for a church in Maryland?" Jackson considers carefully before answering. "We're defending our homes, our families, everything we possess. The North fights for principles. We fight for survival itself. That difference explains why we'll hold this ground." The private nods, understanding crystallizing suddenly. General Ambrose Burnside finally commits his entire corps, fresh regiments advancing across the bloodied landscape. 15,000 Federal soldiers bear down on Jackson's exhausted defenders. This represents the decisive moment. Jackson has exactly 2,000 reserves remaining. He watches Federal ranks approaching through smoke and dust. His hand trembles slightly, not from fear, but from crushing responsibility. Jackson draws his sword. Rarely does he employ this weapon. "Forward," he commands simply. That word carries the weight of destiny. 2,000 Confederate soldiers rise from their positions and charge directly toward Union lines. It's a desperate gamble, counterattack before being overrun. The collision of armies creates pandemonium, screaming, gunfire, chaos. Yet Jackson's final reserve holds firm. Federal soldiers reach the defensive position and attempt flanking maneuvers. Combat becomes primal, desperate, murderous. Men use rifle butts, bayonets, fists, teeth. Civilization disappears. The sunken road fills with bodies. Confederate defenders, fighting on familiar terrain, maintain discipline longer than attacking soldiers. Eventually, superior Federal numbers begin overwhelming the position. Jackson realizes the line is collapsing. Just as Jackson's final reserve breaks, Confederate artillery batteries arrive with General James Longstreet's reinforcements. Artillery opens fire point blank into compressed Federal ranks. Explosions devastate the Union assault. Federal momentum collapses like a building losing its foundation. Jackson sees Longstreet, and something hardens in his expression, not cruelty, but absolute determination, crystallizing into action. Hooker realizes his assault has failed catastrophically. Union soldiers begin withdrawing, carrying or abandoning wounded. Some regiments retreat in good order. Others scatter disorganized. Jackson doesn't order pursuit. He understands his men are barely standing, barely capable of coherent action. Instead, he watches Federal soldiers retreat with an expression suggesting he expected nothing less than victory eventually. General Hood approaches Jackson, limping from a wound received during the counterattack. "Sir, we've destroyed the Federal assault, but our division's shattered. We've lost 2,000 men." Jackson looks at this fierce warrior steadily. "You've held the line successfully. That matters more than divisional cohesion. Rest your soldiers." Hood nods, realizing that Jackson measures success differently than conventional commanders do. As fighting diminishes, an eerie quiet settles over the battlefield. No cannon thunder, no musket fire, no screaming, just wind moving through the cornfield. Jackson sits motionless on his horse, processing what he's witnessed. Around him, exhausted soldiers begin comprehending their survival. The killing stops. The horror pauses temporarily. Jackson closes his eyes briefly, perhaps experiencing something approaching peace. Confederates begin the grim work of identifying and burying their dead. Young men barely old enough to shave lie frozen in death. Jackson watches from a distance, his face unreadable. He has held the line successfully, but the price, 3,000 casualties among 14,000 defenders, weighs heavily. Jackson understands that victory purchased at such cost approaches the cost of defeat. That evening, Jackson writes by candlelight in his journal, "The Lord sustained us today. Our cause remains just. Tomorrow we may fight again." His handwriting remains steady, methodical. Some leaders celebrate survival dramatically. Jackson merely acknowledges God's providence quietly. His faith and discipline form an unbreakable bond. Prayer provides the psychological foundation sustaining Jackson through unprecedented horror. General Hooker sits in his headquarters tent, reviewing casualty reports numbly. 17,000 Federal soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. His assault failed despite overwhelming numerical advantage. Hooker tells his staff officers, Jackson cannot be beaten in direct assault. We must find different approaches entirely. The realization stings deeply. One Confederate general has neutralized an entire Federal corps effectively. Antietam continues raging elsewhere across 10 miles of terrain. General Lee's entire army teeters on destruction's edge. Yet Jackson's successful defense purchases time-precious hours, allowing other Confederate sectors to stabilize. In military history, holding positions against overwhelming odds often decides entire campaigns decisively. Jackson's stubborn resistance exemplifies this principle perfectly, though strategic consequences remain unclear momentarily. Jackson never raises his voice during the day's fighting. He never threatens or bullies soldiers. Instead, his calm confidence radiates through ranks like invisible current. Men fight harder because Jackson fights beside them, demonstrating unwavering commitment. Military science identifies this phenomenon as leadership by example. Jackson's greatest weapon wasn't firepower, but personal courage demonstrated continually before witnesses. Dunker Church becomes a makeshift hospital and morgue simultaneously. Medical orderlies work by torchlight, amputating limbs, binding wounds, comforting the dying. A young surgeon tells Jackson, "General, the suffering exceeds comprehension. We're losing men faster than we can treat them." Jackson replies quietly, "War is suffering personified." That's precisely why peace must follow whatever cost appears necessary. News of Jackson's defense spreads rapidly through Confederate ranks. He held 14,000 men against 3 separate assaults by 30,000 Federal soldiers. Stories transform into legends. Private soldiers mention his name reverently. Officers study his tactics, seeking tactical genius secrets. At Dunker Church, Jackson's legend transcends man and becomes Mythology, the general whom nothing can defeat. Union generals gather analyzing why superior numbers couldn't break Jackson's lines. One suggests, "Jackson anticipated our movements perfectly." Another responds, "His soldiers would follow him into hell itself." Both observations prove correct. Jackson combines tactical brilliance with ability inspiring extraordinary sacrifice. Few commanders achieve both simultaneously. Their combined power explains why Federal numerical advantage proved insufficient ultimately. General Lee decides to withdraw from Maryland that night, heading back across the Potomac River. The invasion has failed strategically, yet Jackson's defensive success ensures the Confederate army escapes intact rather than being annihilated completely. Lee realizes that sometimes battles aren't won but merely survived. Surviving preserves the possibility of future victory. Annihilation guarantees nothing. Confederate Private James Morrison sits cleaning his rifle, removing powder residue. Miraculously, he remains unwounded. Around him, wounded men groan through darkness. Morrison contemplates the Union soldiers he shot, farmers like himself, ordinary men forced into extraordinary circumstances. War transforms everyone profoundly. He wonders whether he'll ever feel normal again. Probably not, he decides finally. Despite maintaining composed exterior, Jackson is utterly drained physically and psychologically. His body aches profoundly. His mind spins endlessly. Could he have performed better? Could fewer men have died under different tactical approaches? These questions haunt him perpetually. Leaders carry decision weight, both successful choices and failures. Jackson shoulders this burden alone in darkness, unable to share psychological devastation. The White Dunker Church survives the battle largely intact despite countless bullets and shells striking it. Later generations visit this structure, attempting to imagine the horror unfolding there. The church becomes a monument to human courage, sacrifice, and stubborn determination. Bricks and mortar survive. Flesh and blood do not. Buildings outlast the humans who fight around them, a bitter commentary on war's nature. General George McClellan, commanding Federal forces overall, decides not pursuing Lee's retreating army. This decision generates controversy immediately. Some historians argue aggressive pursuit could have ended the war that very day. Others contend that Confederate resistance, particularly Jackson's brilliant defense, has damaged the Federal army too severely for immediate pursuit. Military historians debate this moment endlessly without reaching consensus. Antietam produces 23,000 casualties in a single day, America's bloodiest single day ever. Jackson's sector accounts for approximately 3,000 Confederate and 5,000 Federal casualties. These numbers represent individual human tragedies, sons never returning home, families destroyed by grief, futures erased completely. Numbers cannot capture personal devastation no matter how large they become. Magnitude overwhelms human comprehension. Dunkirk Church becomes symbolic of Confederate resistance ideologically. Jackson proved that superior numbers don't guarantee victory if a disadvantaged commander possesses tactical brilliance. Discipline, leadership, and will can overcome numerical disadvantage temporarily. Military academies study this engagement for generations. Officers learn that Jackson achieved the seemingly impossible, combining competent subordinates with ruthless strategic execution perfectly orchestrated. In Southern newspapers, reports glorify Jackson's defensive success extensively. One editorial proclaims, "General Jackson demonstrates that Confederate courage equals Federal numbers arithmetically." This narrative strengthens Southern resolve substantially. Citizens believe victory remains possible eventually. Yet harsh reality: Southern manpower is finite, while Northern resources seem limitless, becomes increasingly undeniable. Jackson's tactical triumph masks strategic decline. Federal medic Robert Chen works through darkness, treating wounded soldiers indiscriminately, Union and Confederate alike. He tells a wounded Confederate, "You fought remarkably well today." The Confederate responds, "So did your soldiers. War possesses no victors, only survivors, ultimately." These chance conversations humanize enemies, revealing shared humanity beneath opposing political causes. Conscience complicates warfare's moral simplicity profoundly. That night, Jackson questions God's purpose intensely. If his cause is righteous, why does Providence permit such slaughter? He resolves this spiritual crisis through faith. God tests righteous people. Suffering proves faith's authenticity ultimately. This conviction that divine providence supports the Confederacy sustains Jackson throughout remaining brutal warfare years. Belief becomes his ultimate psychological weapon against despair. Lee's Maryland invasion ends in strategic retreat. Yet Jackson's successful defense ensures the Confederate Army preserves combat effectiveness substantially. Future campaigns, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, depend on maintaining force structure. Jackson's tactical success at Dunkirk Church provides necessary breathing room. Small battles influence larger campaigns through unexpected cascading consequences. History flows from decisions made in moments of extreme pressure. Observers note differences between Jackson and Hooker starkly. Hooker relies on aggressiveness and numerical superiority. Jackson combines aggression with tactical flexibility skillfully. Hooker commits reserves rigidly. Jackson reserves final troops for decisive moments strategically. These distinctions explain the outcome fundamentally. Leadership involves not merely willingness to fight, but fighting intelligently, adapting to circumstances, maintaining composure under unprecedented pressure. The sunken road becomes famous in Civil War military history. Future battles, Fredericksburg, Kennesaw Mountain, numerous others feature similar use of protected terrain against frontal assaults. Jackson demonstrated that prepared defensive positions multiply military effectiveness significantly. This lesson persists through modern military doctrine. Terrain matters equally as troop numbers. Geography becomes weaponry when commanders exploit it brilliantly. In following weeks, survivors communicate their experiences passionately. One Confederate tells his family, "Jackson stood watching us like a stone statue. We'd have charged into hell for that man." Another Federal prisoner reports, "Jackson's soldiers fought differently than other Confederates entirely. They fought like they believed in something transcendent." These testimonies reveal leadership's intangible psychological power clearly. Jackson's victory carries enormous price tag ultimately. 1/3 of his soldiers fall in battle. Officers he relied upon die permanently. Entire regiments are decimated beyond recovery prospects. Replacement soldiers lacking training arrive, filling gaps inadequately. The Confederate Army sustains damage from which recovery becomes impossible. Tactical success masks strategic decline unfolding silently. Numbers quantify losses. Imagination struggles comprehending devastation. General Hood, shattered by the day's losses, becomes harder, colder, increasingly desperate psychologically. He pursues increasingly reckless tactics afterward, believing only aggression can overcome Union numerical advantage. Jackson's example inspires but simultaneously corrupts. Some officers learn patience from Jackson's methods. Others learn that only desperate measures work. Interpretation matters tremendously. The same example teaches different lessons. Union generals study Jackson's tactics obsessively afterward. They recognize that frontal assaults against prepared positions waste lives without achieving objectives. Future Federal commanders Grant particularly emphasize flanking maneuvers, turning movements, breaking supply lines, rather than direct assaults. Jackson's defensive victory inadvertently teaches the Union Army fundamental tactical lessons. Enemy success becomes tutor for future adversaries. Maryland residents witness the aftermath firsthand. Farmers discover bodies in their fields. Families lose livestock. Crops destroyed completely. War arrives in their backyards, transforming abstract conflict into personal catastrophe suddenly. One elderly woman tells Jackson, "You've destroyed our harvest and sons permanently." Jackson replies quietly, "War destroys everything. It touches indiscriminately. That's why we must end it." Despite maintaining public composure, Jackson begins questioning whether Confederate victory remains possible realistically. The Union Army's ability, sustaining enormous casualties while returning with fresh troops, suggests unlimited resources fundamentally. Confederate manpower appears finite by comparison. Jackson's mathematical mind calculates odds, reaching uncomfortable conclusions. Yet he never voices these doubts publicly, maintaining resolute demeanor before subordinates constantly. Historians argue about Antietam's significance endlessly. Was it Confederate victory because Lee's army survived? Federal victory because Lee retreated? Truth resists simple categorical divisions. Jackson's defense prevents Confederate collapse momentarily. Lee's retreat prevents Federal breakthrough. Both interpretations contain validity genuinely. Reality proves more ambiguous than victory divided by defeat categories suggest. Complexity characterizes actual history. As darkness deepens, Confederate reinforcements consolidate positions completely. No additional Federal assaults develop. Jackson realizes immediate threats have passed momentarily. He allows himself a moment of stillness finally. Around him, soldiers rest where they collapsed, too exhausted, seeking shelter elsewhere. Jackson envies their unconsciousness. Sleep brings temporary escape from crushing responsibility. Exhaustion becomes blessing. Federal medic Chen encounters a dying Confederate officer, beyond saving perhaps 6 hours remaining. Chen tells him, "I can give you morphine for the pain." The officer accepts gratefully. Chen realizes he's offering mercy to an enemy. Yet in that moment, the officer becomes simply a suffering human worthy of compassion transcending uniform, ideology, or political cause. Northern newspapers initially report Antietam as Federal victory because Lee retreats. Southern newspapers claim victory because Confederate forces survive intact. Truth that both armies fought to exhaustion then withdrew receives minimal attention. Public narratives require clear victors and vanquished. Complexity and ambiguity don't satisfy readers seeking simple meaning from complicated historical events. Stories matter more than nuance. That evening, Jackson kneels in prayer for 2 hours continuously. He prays for the dead, both Union and Confederate soldiers equally. He prays for widows and orphans facing uncertain futures. He prays for wisdom regarding future decisions. He prays that God's will, however mysterious, ultimately triumphs. Prayer provides Jackson psychological refuge, transforming anguish into acceptance gradually. Despite exhaustion and casualties, Confederate morale holds surprisingly well. Soldiers recognize they've achieved the impossible, halting Federal assaults, despite overwhelming odds completely. Jackson hasn't been defeated. Perhaps Confederate victory remains possible eventually. This psychological boost sustains the Army through subsequent retreat. Morale becomes weaponry equal to gunpowder. Confidence matters profoundly during warfare. Federal morale suffers conversely. Soldiers expected crushing Confederate resistance using numerical advantage. Instead, they encountered unexpected tactical brilliance and determined defense repeatedly. Regiments attacking confidently this morning retreat demoralized by evening. Confidence transforms into doubt. Leaders realize Confederate soldiers fight differently, as though possessing something worth dying for genuinely. Ideology matters in warfare. Jackson writes to Lee that evening, "The Lord blessed our efforts. The enemy withdrew. We retain initiative." This assessment proves tactically accurate but strategically incomplete. Confederate initiative continues eroding despite daily tactical victories. Northern industrial capacity, population resources, economic strength gradually overwhelms Southern determination and military brilliance. Jackson misses this broader reality entirely. In following decades, survivors erect a monument to Jackson's defense. Pilgrimages become common. Veterans return revisiting landscapes where they risked death repeatedly. The white church becomes sacred ground consecrated by sacrifice, haunted by memory perpetually. Monuments attempt transforming tragedy into meaning, though survivors understand meaning often remains elusive, complicated, morally ambiguous. During the battle, Hood receives wounds that permanently damage his arm. Future campaigns are compromised by this physical limitation significantly. Yet Hood continues commanding despite diminishment. Jackson's example, fighting through exhaustion and pain, influences Hood's decision to continue. Sometimes, inspiration leads to tragedy when leaders prioritize duty excessively. Personal sacrifice becomes moral obligation. Some historians argue that had Jackson possessed 10,000 additional soldiers, he could have counterattacked Hooker's corps, routing it completely. This opportunity vanishes due to Confederate forces being stretched across difficult terrain. Jackson works with available resources brilliantly. Future military theorists study this, learning that tactical perfection cannot overcome strategic limitations indefinitely. Resources matter, ultimately. A young officer asks Jackson about warfare's morality, specifically killing men who've done nothing personal against him. Jackson responds, "War forces terrible actions. We survive convincing ourselves our cause justifies costs. Perhaps we're right, perhaps we're wrong. God will judge eventually." This honest reflection reveals Jackson's internal conflicts. Certainty and doubt coexist within him constantly. Despite suffering 25% casualties among his force, Jackson's corps remains functionally military unit. Men who could have scattered instead remain disciplined. This resilience stems from Jackson's leadership. Soldiers fight better trusting their commander. Jackson's demonstrated competence, combined with obvious care for their welfare, creates bonds stronger than fear. Trust becomes the foundation. While Jackson achieves tactical success, Lee's invasion ends strategically failed. The Maryland campaign fails rallying European recognition or generating Northern political pressure Lee expected. Jackson's brilliant defensive performance cannot overcome larger strategic miscalculations. War requires both tactical proficiency and strategic wisdom. Achieving one without the other guarantees eventual defeat inevitably. Genius has limitations. Weeks following the battle, wounded soldiers still die from infections and complications slowly. Some survivors lose limbs, faces, mobility returning home permanently changed. Dunkerchurch's defensive victory cost 3,000 Confederate soldiers their lives or permanent disability. These costs extend beyond immediate battle, affecting families, communities, and the nation's future profoundly. Consequences accumulate across generations. As Jackson's reputation grows through successive battles, he transforms into a mythological figure, the general whom nothing can defeat, favored by Providence. Confederate soldiers repeat stories reverently. This mythology sustains morale substantially, but creates impossible expectations. Eventually, mythology collides with human limitation when Jackson falls at Chancellorsville just months later. Mortality undermines legends. Historians identify Gettysburg 6 months later as the Civil War's turning point. Yet Jackson's death at Chancellorsville, directly preceding the Pennsylvania invasion, arguably constitutes a more significant moment. At Dunkerchurch, the Confederacy could reasonably believe eventual victory possible. After Gettysburg, that belief becomes impossible permanently. Jackson's defense represents the last moment of reasonable Confederate optimism. The white Dunkerchurch stands today much as it appeared in 1862. Visitors tour surrounding fields, attempting imagining violence unfolding there. Plaques identify positions, commemorate fallen soldiers. The church surviving the nation's worst violence raises questions. What endures? What persists when nations collapse? Perhaps the church survives because it represents transcendence, hope for peace, faith beyond conflict, structures persisting through human chaos eternally.